Hey everybody, Rose Matter here, and having just finished the insane episode 2 of Umineko, I have just one thought. What the heck is going on? Okay, obviously I have a lot more to say considering this video isn't 10 seconds long, but that's the overall feeling this chapter gave me. The summary of the chapter warns that the difficulty level was first rate, and they weren't kidding. In the first episode, Umineko plays out like a standard murder mystery, taking place in a big isolated mansion involving a rich family killing each other off for money. Sure, there were hints of something supernatural playing a part in the deaths, but Beatrice was, for the most part, a background character. Other than Golden Butterfly showing up occasionally and Maria claiming to have talked to Beatrice, we the reader as well as most of the characters question whether she actually exists. However, in episode 2, she is front and center, interacting with the characters and blatantly killing people in plain sight of the reader. The addition of Beatrice as a guest to the mansion was an unexpected and fun change, and I think doing something like this so early in the overarching story was a smart decision. It addresses the concern of just retelling a similar story with minor changes, like multipath visual novels do with their roots. It would have been boring if nothing had changed in the story up until the point of the first Twilight having different victims, especially after having just read the first chapter. But having Beatrice, the grand mastermind, appear on stage so early in the story turned the whole thing upside down and had me excited to see what chaos she would cause. This chapter also introduces a key element to the story that will be integral at solving this mystery: the Red Truths. Until the introduction of the Red Truths, I had a similar mindset at the beginning of this episode as I had in Chapter 1, being unable to trust anything presented to me simply because neither side had strong evidence to convince me that either witches existed or humans were the sole perpetrators of the murders. Considering how many ambiguities there are and how many possibilities exist, the introduction of the Red Truth is a game changer. Unfortunately, Beatrice being a witch is deceiving by nature, and deliberately withholds revealing the truth. Keeping that in mind, I think that it is just as important to look at what isn't stated in a Red Truth, rather than just looking at what was said. After all, the person who speaks the Red Truth is still our adversary in this game, and what reason is there to believe the whole truth would ever be freely given by your opponent? When the Red Truths are first introduced, you are just as confused as Battler, not knowing how to deal with them. It's daunting at first, but eventually Battler begins to understand how to use it to his advantage, and even manages to Phoenix Wright his way to win the first battle in regards to the mystery of the chapel doors. Beatrice isn't allowed to completely make up everything that happens during the game. She can lie by omission and twist the truth, but behind her verbal sleight of hand, there's a hint of something objective that you can use as a foundation to build your theories. Also, remember that the Red Truth can't be used to lie. For example, did Beatrice ever say that she killed people with magic in red? Sure, she showed you magic, and she told you she used magic, but did she ever say it explicitly? This shows that the Red Truth can be a weapon for both sides. While it can be trusted at face value, you can bet Beatrice will take advantage of it and will try to trick you with it. However overwhelming things are right now, the Red Truths will be essential to begin to make sense of this story. In my opinion, the murders are even harder to solve in this chapter due to the fact that the game shows you, with the exception of the first Twilight, each murder as they happen with Beatrice present. In a way, being given explicit knowledge of what happened actually makes it more difficult to solve, because it makes it harder for us to make our own theories. But how do we know the events Beatrice describes as happening actually are happening? We could be dealing with an unreliable narrator situation. Of course, Beatrice wants Battler and the reader to recognize her existence, so she has to be on the offensive and act more aggressively than in episode 1, where she was mostly a background character. But the problem is, I really have no idea how to go about this. In one scene, we see Beatrice and Shannon do battle with force fields and demon magical girls, while in another, Beatrice will go into minute details related to master keys and locked rooms. It's easy to get distracted with all these fantasy elements thrown at you this episode, and I think the key to solving the mystery is not to become overwhelmed by it and focus on the basics. Speaking of fantasy elements, we can't discuss episode 2 without mentioning the most holy shit aspect. Canon and Shannon have magical powers. I had figured from the first episode that Kanon and Shannon were different in some way, but I could have never guessed that they had actual magical powers. This seems to apply to Genji as well. The word furniture has been thrown around a lot in this game, but my assumption was that they were plucked from an orphanage and sworn to serve the Ushiramiya family, and labeled as furniture to signify their subservience to Kinzo. However, I was way off, and it is revealed that they were actually made or crafted by Kinzo. This would fit in with Kinzo's obsession with dark magic, and in the character profiles at the end of the episode, Kinzo is described as literally creating Shannon, Kanon, and Genji. I found it a little strange in episode 1 that Kinzo encouraged them to take part in solving the epitaph. I assumed it was because the more people taking part, the more sacrifices there would be. But if Kinzo created them, in a weird way they're part of his family too. And I guess that also explains why they're allowed to wear the Ushiramiya crest, whereas Goda and Kumasawa don't. And now the reason why they call themselves furniture is made apparent. They are not actually human, but literally created to serve a purpose. Suddenly, Kanon and Shannon's desire to become human makes much more sense. Also, slightly off topic, but I am hyped as hell to see the inevitable display of Genji's full power. Another change in this episode was who the 7 stakes of Purgatory targeted. I hope I get this information right. So, there were a few characters who had the same stakes in them between episodes 1 and 2, and those were Kanon with the stake of Wrath, Kumasawa with the stake of Envy, and Nanjo with the stake of Sloth. On a side note, I found it weird that Kumasawa wouldn't have the stake of Sloth considering her aversion to work. However, there were some differences in this episode as well. Greed in episode 1 was Kinzo, episode 2 Shannon. Pride, episode 1 Genji, episode 2 George. Gluttony, episode 1 Hideyoshi, episode 2 Goda. And Lust, episode 1 Ava, episode 2 Jessica. Does this information have any relevance at all to the overarching story? I'm not sure yet, but still felt it was something interesting to mention. So there was a lot of new elements introduced to the story in this episode, but I think it's just as important to focus on what remained the same between chapter 1 and 2. Here were some of the similarities I noted, and I'm sure there's a lot I missed. 1. 3 Ushiramiya siblings die on the first twilight. 2. George proposes to Shannon. 3. Beatrice's letters. The contents and recipients change, but the fact these letters appear throughout the story is consistent. 4. A couple is killed on the second twilight. 5. An Ushiramiya family member is left at the end with a gun. 6. Badler and Maria are left alive until the end. It'll be interesting to see if these repeat in chapter 3. If it does, there must be a reason. I don't know what significance, if any, these repeated scenarios serve, but my theory about Beatrice resetting the game board and keeping these consistent pieces must exist for a reason. Or maybe they don't. I have no idea, which is a sentiment that applies to basically everything I say in this video. Now, let's go back to Badler and Beatrice. It seems the conversations this meta Badler has with Beatrice are taking place in the Golden Land or Purgatorio or some meta plane of existence separate from the real world, and this part of the story is an almost direct continuation of the end of chapter 1. The meta Badler in this chapter, I believe, is the Badler of the first game, while the one on the game board is a pawn that has no memories of what happened in the previous game. This episode is also interesting in the fact that Badler loses so utterly and completely. Not only does he fail to solve the epitaph and figure out who or what is the cause of the murders, he is damned to become Beatrice's furniture for all eternity. Even with the knowledge that victory is possible, he completely breaks due to being constantly made to have to suspect one of his family or friends. The fact he is so determined to reject the witch, and yet isn't willing to blame anyone else, is his biggest weakness, and leads to his inevitable downfall. What surprised me most so much in this episode was how quickly Badler gave up after the third closed room. With the first two, he was his usual stubborn self, trying to find an answer, but with the third one, it felt like he didn't even try to find a solution, and after a quick back and forth with Rosa accusing each other of being a wolf, he gives up and declares Beatrice exists. Was there a reason for this, or did he just reach his mental and emotional limit? At least we had Meta Badler's last-minute heel turn at the end. But how many more cycles can he go through before that fiery spirit is extinguished? Speaking of Badler's stubbornness, I still don't quite understand how he can be in some meta world watching himself and his family be killed over and over again and still deny witches and magic exist. But in a way I can kind of understand where he's coming from. I see the magic, the demon goats, Canon waving a goddamn laser sword around, and yet I'm still not convinced magic is the only explanation for everything. Now, I'm not saying magic doesn't exist in this world at all, just that magic is not the sole cause of the murders. For example, if Beatrice can use magic, why did she have to use human-like methods to get in and out of the chapel? Did she only do it to confuse Battler? It's said that she likes to make moves that don't benefit her to mess around with her opponent. Or is everything actually done by humans? Am I just an incompetent imbecile like Battler who refuses to accept what's in front of me? So many questions. Then comes the Tea Party chapters to drop even more information on us. First, we meet the earlier mentioned Lambda Delta, whom Birdcastle apparently defeated in a similar situation to when she was trapped inside Lambda's world, pretty much confirming that Lambda Delta's board were the events that took place in Higurashi. I also love Burn's callback to Higurashi with the fight on rallying cry. Also, Lambda's title as the Witch of Certainty brings back memories of Takono's claims in Higurashi that her victory was certain. Couple that with the similar looks and voice, and I can't imagine that that choice was a coincidence. Lambda Delta claims Beatrice is soft because she'll set up a board so she could finish us off with just a few moves, but instead chooses to make bad moves to make the game go on longer. Lambda Delta calls this playing around, whereas Lambda insists on complete and total victory. So with her on Beatrice's side, I can only imagine what craziness we're going to see in later chapters. Berncastel, meanwhile, talks to the player directly, telling us not to give up, mentioning that the game so far is unfair, which makes me think that not everything we're shown is true. But again, witches do exist, at least in some meta world. But then why do we see hints of logic that should otherwise be unnecessary if magic was solely involved? So this pushes me more into believing that there is a human element behind the murders. But again, the witches' familiars, the magic, everything otherworldly that happens doesn't seem to just be fabrication. So maybe the games are a combination of both logic and magic. In regards to all the supposed magic going on, I don't really know what to say to that. I don't have any kind of solution I can think of right now that wouldn't sound incredibly forced. Is it some kind of Ushiromiya disease similar to Higurashi that afflicts the Ushiromiya family and the servants that cause a shared hallucination of a witch killing them off? Hallucinogenic drugs that are pumped throughout the island causing people to see things that can't be explained logically? Some kind of messed up game created by Kinzo to play his family against each other to see who's worthy of his inheritance? An alternate suggestion is the whole thing is suspect from the start because we're dealing with an unreliable narrator. Having said that, I feel like there's a kernel of truth in each of these possibilities, but it'll take a few more episodes to come to a more confident hypothesis or theory. Anyway, that will do it for my discussion on episode 2 of Umineko. I'm sorry I didn't have as many theories in this video as I did for the first episode. All the new things thrown at me this chapter made it a lot harder to come up with any concrete ideas on who I think committed the murders and in general what the hell is going on. Just like Battler, I was overwhelmed by Beatrice, but I'll never give up and I'll never stop thinking. No matter what happens, I can't surrender, because if I surrender to the witch, it's all over. I'm excited to get into the next chapter to see what craziness awaits me, and I hope you guys are looking forward to it as well. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed this style of video, and if you're new to Umineko like me, leave a comment with your thoughts and theories on the story so far. And look forward to next Friday for episode 3. Until then, bye guys. Special thanks to my top tier patrons, Nana, Sparky, Derek Nickel, Harry Gazif, Asborn Kennedy, and iCognito.